Throughout the vast majority of human history, diversity in gender and sexuality were not seen as moral issues, but as simple facts of life. From Africa to the Americas, from Polynesia to Siberia, and just about everywhere in between, in 9 out of 10 instances, indigenous cultures were accepting of our community's right to exist freely and safely. This was until the Islamic empires and merchants, and before the Christian missionaries and explorers arrived, bringing with them not only disease and exploitation, but also a worldview based in guilt, submission, and a complete intolerance for the local belief systems they would encounter. You see, prior to these Abrahamic invasions, homosexuality and transness were woven into ritual mythology and community life across much of the planet. But with the arrival of Christianity and Islam, the world was plunged into an age of oppression that we have yet to fully escape even today. But don't just take my word for it, because in this video, we are going to examine how both fundamentally reshaped the social landscapes of the world. It is a story of two vast religious and civilizational projects, each convinced that its interpretation of God must not only govern their own people and lands, but rather all of humanity. But let's start at the beginning. In pre-colonial Africa, gender and sexuality were defined in different ways, but not through a moral lens of right or wrong. The Buganda kingdom, in what is now Uganda, recognized Mukoto Dako, individuals assigned male at birth who lived and dressed as women and who often had male partners. Among the indigenous peoples of Ghana and Burkina Faso, gender was viewed as a set of spiritual and social roles, not biological absolutes. In many parts of West Africa, spiritual intermediaries could move between genders depending on their relationship to the ancestors or deities being worked with at the time. Across the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia had its own spectrum of gender identity. In Indonesia, the Bisu of the South Sulawesi were gender transient spiritual leaders who served as mediators between humanity and the divine. Nearby, in Java, the waria is a term used to describe people who blur masculine and feminine boundaries. Similarly, in the pre-Islamic societies of Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines, it is well documented that there were priests and healers whose gender presentation did not fit binary norms. In the far north of the continent among Siberian peoples, such as the Chukchi, Evenki, and Yakut, shamans often transcended gender expectations as well, as part of their spiritual vocation. Within these Arctic and subarctic communities, gender variance was not treated as transgression, but a mark of the divine. Across the Pacific, from Polynesia to Micronesia, similar views on our people were commonplace. The Mahu of Hawaii and the Liti of Tonga embodied a third gender role that carried deep respect in local communities, and these are just two examples of many. The Americas told a similar story, and Two-Spirit has become a broad umbrella term for trans and gender nonconforming peoples across pre-Columbian North America. In the Mesoamerican Zapotec culture, Mushes were recognized as a third gender and seen as a typical part of society. And while I have mentioned many examples of trans and non-binary acceptance, it's worth being clear that homosexuality was never criminalized in any of these societies either. Reproduction was often expected, but same-sex relationships were seen as a normal part of the human experience. But this all changed when the Christians and Muslims arrived, and we will begin with addressing the former. You see, according to countless government records, missionary diaries, and church writings, the Christian conquest of the world was not only about resource extraction and imperialism, it was about the remaking of human life in the image of a single jealous biblical God. From the 15th century onward, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant empires treated sexual morality as a key justification for conquest. Christianity had by this point fused Roman patriarchal law with biblical literalism, producing a theology in which sex served only for procreation and marriage was the sole legitimate vessel for intimacy. This was meant to uphold men at the pinnacle of society, to protect capital flowing from one generation to the next, and, above all else, to create a culture of control and submission to benefit the elite. When European powers reached Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they carried with them not only guns and trade goods, but also Bibles and missionary schools. Indigenous views on sexual and gender diversity were labeled savagery because they threatened the Christian man's very weak grip on power. Missionaries wrote obsessively about the need to civilize natives by teaching chastity and heterosexual marriage. They introduced sodomy laws and cross-dressing laws, many of which remain on the books today. The Spanish Catholics, the English Protestants, the Russian Orthodox, and many others that I won't list for sake of brevity, were all spreading similar filth in different places in different ways. Consider Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, enacted in 1862 under British rule. It criminalized, quote, carnal intercourse against the order of nature. If you did not catch it through the pathetic wording of this law, the statute banned being gay. Nearly identical laws were exported across the British Empire to places like Singapore, Malaysia, Nigeria, Kenya, and far too many more to list in a single video. These laws had no local precedent. They were Christian imports. In the Russian imperial code that was forced upon indigenous Siberians and Central Asians, same-sex intercourse between men was also explicitly criminalized. Article 995 of 1835 outlawed relationships between men. This law was used to accuse and target shamans throughout Russia's colonial empire in order to further exert total control over daily life. As one would likely expect, missionaries also targeted local spiritual systems that had supported our people. Christian reordering of family life, centered on male headship and female submission, displaced indigenous kinship models that had often been far more flexible, and they branded indigenous religious leaders as demonic, heretical, and blasphemous, all charges that more often than not resulted in death. By the late 19th century, sexual repression was a core instrument of Christian colonial rule. The colonizer's body became a moral symbol, heterosexual, cisgender, disciplined. The colonized body was the opposite, dark, excessive, deviant, and in need of correction. This claimed moral hierarchy was used to justify empire, slavery, and cultural destruction far more than many want to admit. It was seldom claimed that black and brown people were bad for being black or brown, but rather that black and brown people were bad because they lacked Christianity, and by extension, morality and godliness. And as such, this same Christianity became a more devastating weapon than the musket ever could be. Islamic colonization followed a very similar path to its Christian counterpart. It was, in its own right, a sweeping system of religious imperialism that erased local forms of gender and sexual diversity in the name of Allah. Where Christianity carried the cross and crown, Islam brought the sword and crescent, equally convinced that all cultures were destined to fall under Sharia law. Muslim colonization between the 12th and 16th centuries in places like Indonesia and Malaysia led to their once respected LGBTQ community being subjected to raids, public floggings, and imprisonment, something that continues to this day. This part of the world went from being one of the most LGBTQ friendly to one of the most hostile due to Islamic law. In northern Nigeria, Sudan, and Somalia, along with many other African countries, Islamic law was introduced in earnest between the 16th and 18th centuries by traders and slavers from the Arab world. Both then, and now, queer people in these countries are routinely sentenced to death or lashings for existing visibly. In Iran, which used to be called Persia, the spread of Islamic colonization in the 7th and 10th centuries led to Sharia law being implemented, making previously accepted queer Persians criminals under the imported legal framework from Arabia. This same story played out across Central Asia, South Asia, East Africa, and even parts of Western China and Southern Russia and beyond. Every time it was a similar tactic: convert a local population through slavery, coercion, or conquest, and then introduce Sharia law, not only leading to the banning of gay relationships in these colonized countries, but also to the criminalization of cross-dressing, which became the foundation for the erasure of trans and gender nonconforming people as well. You see, despite some doctrinal differences, Christianity and Islam share structural features that make them inhospitable to both queer existence and the existence of other belief systems altogether. Of course, some Christians and Muslims are happy to ignore all the horrible scriptures that support genocide, patriarchy, slavery, misogyny, xenophobia, and anti-queerness. But for those practicing the fundamentalist and literalist versions of these religions, all of life becomes centered around the export of your belief to others. Some Christians call it the Great Commission. Some Muslims call it dawah. There are many differences between the two religions, but at their core, the message is the same. Submit or be sent to burn in hell. Obey or suffer the consequences of resisting. Both posit a single omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent authority with a universal moral law that all of humanity must conform to. Some modern interpretations have often tried to soften this perspective, but the damage from centuries of Christian and Islamic colonization can't be undone with a handful of progressive churches and mosques that try to sweep their religion's atrocities under the rug. Some do take accountability, but so much more work remains before the world can heal from the horrors of monotheism. Simply put, the damage did not end with decolonization throughout the 20th century. All of the countries that today criminalize homosexuality inherited such laws from their Christian and Islamic colonizers. In fact, if you are watching today as a queer person from one of these colonized countries, I'm sure we would all benefit greatly by learning from your experiences, so feel free to comment below what you want the world to know about the impact these imported religions have had on your life. Many I have spoken to already have lamented the tragedy of their ancestral societies having been long stripped of their own inclusive traditions, and then persuaded that homophobia and transphobia are native to their culture. The colonial mindset has been internalized to a shocking degree. In Africa, for example, many politicians and religious leaders still defend anti-LGBTQ laws as being authentically African, even though the intolerance itself is a Middle Eastern and European export. The same is true across many other parts of the world, where leaders in countries like Malaysia and Brunei frame the continued persecution of our people as a way to uphold their traditional pure Islamic values, despite these so-called traditional values being anything but indigenous to the people and land. In island nations like Tuvalu and the Solomon Islands, the same is true, but from the Christian side of things. And these examples are everywhere across this scarred earth. In order for our planet to ever truly move past the past and into the future, we must decolonize more than borders and bureaucracies. Reclaiming our freedom means getting back to the ancestral cosmologies that celebrated diversity in sexuality and gender. Like everyone else, Europeans and Arabs also have roots in pre-monotheistic societies, and it is up to each and every person to decide what it means for them to decolonize their spirituality, their morality, and their worldview. Today, the remnants of Christian and Islamic invasions still shape our politics, our laws, and our sense of self across much of the world. To critique this is not to attack an ethnicity or a nationality, but to confront harmful worldviews that continue to drag the world down. If we wish to live in a more just and free world, we must begin by remembering that queerness was never foreign to humanity. It was seen as a connection to the divine, and perhaps most importantly of all, a natural part of being human. The human race has been so deeply traumatized by Abrahamistic colonization, but we will overcome it like we overcame smallpox, one generation at a time. But let me make one final thing clear. I have no hatred for any Christian or Muslim who refuses to read their holy books as literal manuals for life, and who manage to resist the urge to indoctrinate their children with fear and shame. If your faith is symbolic, reflective, and kind, if you teach your children that belief or disbelief are both acceptable choices, free from threats of hell or divine punishment, then I will stand beside you. In the modern day, there are Christian and Muslim communities that are genuinely trying to amend for the evil their religions have brought upon the world. Sadly, this often leads to immense backlash from the far more numerous followers that still reject human rights and want to uphold old oppressive systems. Christians and Muslims that risk their lives to reform their religions will always have my respect. But, on the other hand, if you follow a religion that demands obedience at the cost of compassion, if it grooms the young into believing that love is sin and difference is damnation, then your beliefs are not sacred, they are cruel, and it is an ideology that cannot coexist with human dignity. As such, a belief is not moral, but malignant. Thankfully, no one is stuck in religious bigotry. One can leave at any time. It is not like ethnicity or sexuality. Religious bigotry and fundamentalism is always a choice. We should never hate people for the things they cannot change. But if someone chooses to hold beliefs that restrict other people's freedom, then that, my friends, is an entirely different story. You know, I grew up in a radical Christian family and witnessed firsthand how literal interpretations of the Bible will destroy lives. My boyfriend grew up in a culturally Muslim family in a Muslim-majority country, and yet we are both free from the claws of monotheism and are united in our shared values of humanism, secularism, and anti-theism. No one should ever feel defined by where they were born. If you actually want to find a peace that passes all understanding, I ask you to decolonize your beliefs, dig deep into ancestral wisdom, and remember that you deserve better than the world that Christianity and Islam have left you. On that note, thank you, friends, for watching and spending time today with me as we seek to spread the word about important topics in the community. Please consider liking this video and subscribing, as it really helps to please the algorithm gods. And if you really enjoy these videos and want to support me directly so I can keep making them on a routine basis, consider joining the Queer Kingdom officially here on YouTube by becoming a member of the channel. But just your presence here today means the world to me, so thank you for watching, for caring about our global community, and please always remember that good things do still happen even in dark times. Together, I know we can truly make the world a safer and freer place for us all. Until next time, QK out.